The morning after my sister's wedding, I sat in my car in the parking lot of a gas station and stared at my phone until the screen went dark. My bank account showed $14.32. Not $1,400, $14. The number did not feel real, so I refreshed the page twice. It was still the same. 3 weeks before that morning, I had saved $11,000. That money was not for a vacation. It was not for clothes or a new car. It was the deposit on an apartment in the city where I had been offered the job I spent 2 years working toward. And now it was gone. Every cent of it had been spent on a wedding that everyone told me was the most beautiful thing they had ever seen. Everyone except me. Because I was the one who paid for it, and not a single person at that reception stood up and said my name. Before this story goes any further, I want you to think about something. Think about the last time someone took something from you and called it family. Think about whether you said anything or whether you stayed quiet because you did not want to be the one who caused a problem. That is where Ackles was on that morning in the gas station parking lot. And if you have ever been in that place, you already know how this kind of story begins. The question is whether you know how it ends. Keep listening because Ackles figured it out. My name is Ackles. I am 28 years old, and for most of my life I was the daughter my family described as the responsible one. That phrase sounds like a compliment. I know now that it was not. Being the responsible one in a family that runs on excuses and selective memory does not mean you are respected. It means you are useful. It means you will be the last person to say no, the first person expected to say yes, and the only person no one worries about because everyone has decided you are fine on your own. I grew up in a mid-sized town in the South, the older of 2 daughters. My sister Renee is 4 years younger than me, and she's been my mother's entire emotional universe for as long as I can remember. That is not bitterness talking. It is just the plain truth of the family I grew up in. My mother, Diane, loved both of us. She says that clearly and often. But love, I have learned, is not the same thing as attention, and attention is not the same thing as equity. Renee was the soft one, the sweet one, the one who cried easily and needed protecting. I was the one who did not cry, so I was the one who was left to stand on her own. My father, Gerald, worked in insurance for most of my childhood and spent his evenings either watching sports or sitting in the driveway with a beer, thinking about things he never shared. He was not cruel. He was absent in the way that quiet men can be absent inside a full house. He said what my mother said, believed what she believed, and deferred to her emotional read of every situation. If Diane said Renee needed something, Gerald found a way to provide it. If Diane said I was doing fine, Gerald believed her and moved on to the next thing. I do not tell you this to make my parents sound like monsters. They were not. They were ordinary people with a clear favorite and a blind spot the size of a highway. Most families have some version of this. The difference is whether anyone ever names it. I was a good student. I kept my grades high, stayed out of trouble, worked a part-time job at a grocery store from age 16 onward, and started saving my own money before I even understood what saving meant. I just knew that if I wanted something, I was going to have to build it myself. That knowledge arrived early and stayed. It shaped the person I became. The problem with becoming that person inside the wrong family is that your ability to manage becomes a resource they feel entitled to. I graduated from college with a degree in communications and a minor in business. I paid for my own college through a combination of scholarships, part-time work, and a small educational loan I took out in my own name. My parents helped Renee with her first 2 years of school. They did not help me because, as my mother explained at the time, she knew I would figure it out. That sentence was meant to be a compliment. I filed it away with the others. After graduation, I took a job at a regional marketing firm and spent the next 3 years building experience, taking extra projects, learning everything I could about content strategy and brand development. I was not doing this to impress anyone. I was doing it because I had a goal. There was a company in the city about 3 hours from home, a digital media firm called Arrowwood Creative, and they had a senior content strategist position that had been my dream role since I found their work online at age 22. I had applied twice and been passed over. On my third application, after 3 more years of deliberate experience building, I made it to the final round. The offer came on a Tuesday in February. It was the best professional moment of my life. The salary was 40% higher than what I was making. The role was exactly what I had been building toward. The only thing standing between me and accepting was a first and last month deposit plus a security deposit on a city apartment, which came to roughly $11,000. I had almost exactly that amount in my savings account at that time. I had been building that fund carefully for 2.5 years. Every extra shift, every freelance project, every month I said no to things I wanted so I could put money aside. It was all sitting there ready. I gave myself 2 weeks to sort out the logistics of the move, and then I planned to sign the lease. My sister announced her engagement 3 days after my job offer arrived. Renee had been dating a man named Colin for about 18 months. He was pleasant enough, worked in real estate, and adored Renee in the particular way that made my mother weep with gratitude. The engagement party was held at my parents' house 2 weeks after the announcement. I came home that weekend, genuinely happy for my sister, genuinely ready to celebrate her. I told Renee I was proud of her. I told Colin I was glad he was joining the family. I meant all of it. It was during that visit that my mother first brought up money. She did it quietly, the way she always handled anything that might cause friction. She sat down next to me at the kitchen table after the guests had thinned out, poured herself a glass of wine, and said she wanted to talk about the wedding. I assumed she meant what kind of support she was hoping the family would offer: moral support, planning help, maybe a small contribution. I was wrong about what she meant by small. Diane told me that Renee had her heart set on a wedding that would cost somewhere between $30,000 and $35,000. Colin's family was contributing $10,000. Gerald and Diane had about $8,000 they could pull from their savings without touching their retirement. That left a gap of somewhere between $12,000 and $17,000. And Diane, in the calm voice she used when she had already decided something and was simply informing you of it, said she was hoping I could help fill that gap. I sat with that for a moment before I responded. Then I said that I had my own major expenses coming up and I was not in a position to contribute anything close to that amount. I told her about the job offer, about the apartment deposit, about what I had saved and what it was earmarked for. I told her I was happy to give a meaningful gift, maybe $500, maybe a little more, but I could not give what she was describing without dismantling the plan I had been building for years. Diane listened to all of this. Then she said, and I will never forget exactly how she put it, that Renee only gets married once and that a job is something I could find again, but a wedding like this only happens once in a girl's life. She said it gently. She was not yelling. She was doing the thing she does where the gentler the voice, the more certain she is that the conversation is already over. I held my position that night. I said I understood that the wedding was important and I would give what I could, but I was not going to sacrifice my professional future for it. I drove home feeling like I had handled it. I had spoken clearly. I had been reasonable. I had offered something real while protecting what I had built. I thought that was the end of it. It was not even close to the end. Over the following 6 weeks, the calls came from multiple directions. My mother called every few days with updates on the wedding costs and gentle reminders that the gap was not closing. My Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, called once to tell me that family sacrifices for each other and she hoped I would search my heart. Renee herself called twice, not to pressure me directly, but to describe the venue she had fallen in love with and the photographer she had found and the dress she was dreaming about. Descriptions that were clearly designed to make the costs feel real and the stakes feel high. Each call was a soft push. Each one alone was manageable. Together, they wore at something in me that I am not proud to admit wore down at all. The thing about being the responsible one is that the guilt lever works differently on you. Other people in the family can say no and everyone adjusts. When I say no, the implication is that I am choosing my own comfort over my family's need, and that implication lands differently on someone who has spent her whole life trying to prove she is not selfish. I knew what was happening. Knowing it did not make it stop working. About 7 weeks after the engagement party, I called my mother back and told her I would contribute $5,000 toward the wedding. I told her clearly that was my limit. I said it with confidence. I said it like someone who had made a final decision. My mother thanked me warmly and told me I was a wonderful daughter. 2 weeks after that, I got a call from Gerald. My father almost never calls me about anything that is not a holiday or a logistical matter. When I saw his name on my phone, I felt something tighten in my chest before I even answered. He told me that the venue Renee had chosen required a deposit of $8,000 that weekend or they would lose the date. He told me the family had already used my $5,000 contribution plus the money from Colin's family and their own savings to lock in other vendors. He said they were short by $3,000 and asked if I could help just this once and he would find a way to pay me back. I said I would think about it. I called him back the next day and transferred the $3,000. That was the beginning of the collapse. The pattern repeated 4 more times between that call and the wedding. Each time it was urgent. Each time there was a reason that this particular cost had not been anticipated. The florist required a larger deposit than expected. The catering company increased their per-head price. The rehearsal dinner venue had a minimum spend that had not been made clear in the original quote. The alterations on Renee's dress ran significantly over budget. Each time I was called not as a first option but always as the last resort. Except I was always the one who actually had the money, so I was always the one who actually gave it. I told myself each time that this would be the last time. I kept a mental note of the total and told myself that once the wedding was over, I would have a clear conversation about being repaid for the amounts beyond my original contribution. I held onto that promise to myself like it was something real. It helped me sleep. By the time the wedding weekend arrived, I had contributed a total of $11,300. That was not $5,000. It was not even close to $5,000. It was every dollar I had in savings, plus $300 I had transferred from my checking account because I was short at the end and did not want to cause a scene the week before the wedding. I had not signed my apartment lease. I had called the landlord twice, asked for extensions, and been told that the unit was available until the end of the month but not beyond that. I had emailed Ackles Creative to ask whether there was any flexibility on the start date, hoping I might have an extra month to pull the deposit together from somewhere. They had been understanding but firm. The role needed to be filled. They had another candidate. They needed my answer. I gave them my answer on the Friday morning of my sister's wedding weekend. I told them I was grateful for the opportunity and I was sorry, but I was not in a position to accept the offer at this time. I then put on a blue dress I had bought 2 years earlier and drove to the church to watch my sister get married. The wedding was beautiful. That part was genuinely true. Renee was radiant in the way that brides sometimes are, lit from somewhere inside by certainty and joy. Colin could not take his eyes off her. The flowers were exactly what she had wanted. The reception venue was warm and full, and everyone moved through it with the particular ease of a day that has gone exactly as planned. My mother gave a speech at the reception that made nearly everyone cry. She talked about watching Renee grow up, about how proud she was, about the kind of love Renee deserved and had now found. It was a beautiful speech. My name appeared in it once in a list of family members she thanked collectively for being there. That was the only time I was mentioned in the entire evening. I sat at the family table and smiled when people looked at me and clapped when the toasts were given and danced when the music made it awkward not to. Inside, I was doing the math. I had turned down the best job offer I had ever received. I had emptied my savings account. I had declined an apartment lease in a city where I had wanted to live for 6 years. I had done all of that so that the flowers would be the right color and the catering would be good and the photographer would be excellent and the evening would be everything my sister had dreamed of. And it was. It absolutely was, and no one in that room knew I had given any of it. The morning after the wedding was when I checked my account in the gas station parking lot. I sat there for a long time. I did not cry, which surprised me. I had expected to cry. Instead, I felt something cold and very clear settle into me, the way ice forms on a still pond layer by layer until the whole surface is hard. I thought about every phone call. I thought about every transfer. I thought about the job I had just walked away from. I thought about my mother's speech and the single mention of my name in a list, and I made a decision. I was done being the responsible one for people who would not be responsible for me. The drive home from the wedding took about 2.5 hours. I spent it thinking clearly, not angrily, clearly. There is a difference, and that difference matters to this story. Anger is reactive. It makes you loud. Clarity is deliberate. It makes you precise. I was not going to yell. I was not going to send an emotional message. I was going to think about exactly what had happened, document it honestly, and then decide what came next. When I got home, I opened a notebook and wrote down every dollar I had contributed to the wedding. I had kept records. I kept records of everything. I had text messages, bank transfer confirmations, a few emails. I wrote the amounts in a column and added them up twice to make sure I had it right. $11,300. I wrote that number at the bottom and underlined it. Then I wrote the number that had been in my savings account before the engagement party. Then I wrote the name of the company I had turned down. Then I wrote the start date I had declined. Then I wrote the apartment address I had let go. I looked at that list for about 10 minutes without moving. Then I called Ackles Creative. I asked to speak with the hiring manager, a woman named Patricia, who had been warm and professional throughout the entire interview process. I told her I was calling because my circumstances had changed significantly since I sent my regrets and I wanted to ask directly whether the position had been filled. She told me they had extended an offer to another candidate, but that candidate had not yet accepted. She said she was surprised to hear from me. I told her I owed her an honest explanation, and then I gave her one. I told her I had faced a significant family financial situation that had made it impossible to secure my relocation deposit in time, and that situation had now resolved, and if there was any way to reconsider my candidacy, I was asking clearly for that chance. Patricia put me on hold for 4 minutes. When she came back, she told me she could not revoke an offer that had been made to another candidate, but she could put me at the top of the list if that candidate declined, and she would like to schedule a follow-up call that week to revisit the conversation. She said my work was strong and she had been disappointed when I withdrew. I thanked her and put the phone down and let myself feel something close to hope for the first time in 2 months. Then I called my mother. The call with Diane was not a confrontation. I want to be clear about that. It was a conversation, and I had decided before I dialed that I would keep my voice level, stick to facts, and say exactly what I needed to say without drama. When she picked up, she sounded cheerful. She asked how I was feeling after such a wonderful weekend. I told her I needed to talk about something important and I would appreciate her full attention. I told her the complete total of what I had contributed to the wedding. I walked her through each payment, each call, each amount. I told her about the job offer I had received, the timeline, the deposit I had needed, and the fact that by the time the wedding weekend arrived, I had no savings left and had been forced to decline the position. I told her about the apartment. I told her about the lease I did not sign. I delivered all of it calmly, with no tears, in the straightforward language of someone reading a set of facts into a record. There was a long silence when I finished. Then Diane said she had not realized it had gotten to that amount. She said the wedding had been very complex and there had been so many costs, and she was sorry if things had escalated beyond what I was comfortable with. She said she was sure Gerald and she could find a way to help me with the deposit, and that I should not have given up the job without saying something. I sat with that response for a moment. I had not given up the job without saying something. I had said something repeatedly. I had said I had a major expense coming. I had set a limit. I had named it clearly. And each time a new urgent reason had appeared and the limit had been moved. I pointed this out without raising my voice. I told her the pattern was clear in the record of the calls, and I had the transfer confirmations and the messages to support everything I was saying. Diane shifted. Her voice went from apologetic to careful. She told me that family is supposed to support each other, and she hoped I was not implying something unkind. I told her I was not implying anything. I was stating clearly that I had contributed $11,300 to my sister's wedding, that I had done so at the direct cost of a career opportunity and a housing plan I had spent years building, and that I was now informing her of that fact so that we could all be operating from the same set of truths going forward. She asked what I meant by going forward. I told her I was not asking for an argument. I was not demanding that she feel a particular way. I was simply telling her what had happened and making clear that my financial situation had changed significantly and would continue to affect what I was able to contribute to anything in the family for the foreseeable future. I told her I loved her and I would speak with her again soon. Then I ended the call. I sat in my kitchen for a while after that, listening to the quiet. It felt different from the quiet I had been living in for months. That quiet had been the quiet of someone holding something too heavy and pretending not to notice the weight. This quiet felt like setting something down. Over the following 2 weeks, things in my family got complicated in ways I had anticipated and ways I had not. Renee called me from her honeymoon. She had spoken to our mother. She told me she was sorry, that she had not understood the full scope of what I had contributed, that she and Colin would find a way to pay me back as soon as they were settled. She said it warmly and with what sounded like genuine remorse. I told her I appreciated that and I was happy for her and Colin, and I hoped the honeymoon was wonderful. I meant all of that. I was not angry at Renee in the way people might expect. Renee had not made the calls asking for money. She had not managed the budget. She had been the bride, and she had been protected from the financial complexity by the same people who had constructed it. I was not going to place my full weight of anger on my sister. My mother, however, did not call back for 3 days. When she did, her approach had changed. She was now in a mode I recognized from childhood, the mode where a difficult thing has been discussed among the family and a consensus position has been developed. She told me that everyone agreed I had made a very large contribution and that it was appreciated. She told me she and Gerald had spoken and they were going to put aside $200 a month toward paying me back, which at that rate would take just under 5 years. She delivered this as if it were a generous and considered offer. I told her I understood their situation and I appreciated the intention. I also told her that $200 a month was not a realistic path toward addressing what had happened, and that I had spent 2.5 years building that money for a specific purpose, and losing it had set my life back in concrete and measurable ways. I told her I was not going to demand repayment on a particular schedule, but I wanted her to understand clearly that the expectation of repayment was real and I had not relinquished it. This is when things escalated. Gerald called the next day. He was not angry. he was uncomfortable, which is a different thing. He told me that my mother was upset and that the family was worried I was going to create distance over something that everyone had tried their best on. He said the wedding had been a wonderful occasion and he hoped I was not going to hold it against Renee. I told him I was not holding anything against Renee. I told him I was having a clear and honest accounting of what had happened and what it had cost me personally, and I would not be pressured into pretending the cost did not exist. He said in that quiet way of his that he guessed he understood. Aunt Linda called the following week. Her call was less gentle. She told me that the family was hearing things that concerned her and she hoped I was not planning to cause problems for Renee and Colin right at the start of their marriage. She said weddings are expensive and families help each other, and she had not realized I was the kind of person who kept score. I told her I kept accurate records, which was different from keeping score. I told her that if she had questions about the specific amounts, I was happy to share them. She did not have further questions. She ended the call quickly. 2 weeks after the wedding, I got an email from Patricia at Arrowwood Creative. The other candidate had declined the offer. She was writing to ask whether I was still interested and whether my situation had changed enough to make acceptance viable. She attached the original offer letter and said the terms remained the same. I read that email 3 times. Then I assessed my situation with full honesty. I had $14.32 in my savings account at the point of the lowest balance. Over the following 2 weeks, I had received my regular paychecks and had managed to rebuild my checking account to a functional level, but I did not have $11,000. I did not have anywhere close to it. What I had was a good credit score, a stable job, and a strong professional reputation, and I needed to figure out how to turn those things into a path to the life I had tried to reach. I spent 3 evenings researching. I looked at bridge loans. I looked at employer relocation assistance. I called Patricia and asked directly whether Arrowwood Creative offered any relocation support for incoming hires. She told me they had a modest program and she could ask HR to outline it for me. I asked a friend who had moved cities 2 years earlier how she had managed the deposit gap. She told me about a financial product she had used, a short-term personal loan for relocation costs, and gave me the name of the institution. I put together a plan. It was not comfortable and it was not what I had imagined, but it was workable. I applied for a relocation loan. I asked Arrowwood Creative to provide whatever relocation support the program allowed. I found a shorter-term lease option in the city that required a lower upfront deposit than the original apartment I had been planning on. I gave Patricia my answer on a Thursday morning. I accepted the offer. I did not tell my family immediately. That was a deliberate choice. For 2.5 years, every major development in my professional life had been shared with my family as a way of inviting them into my world. Every time I shared something, it became part of a conversation that was ultimately about what they needed from it. I wanted this to be mine first, before it became anything else. I told my family 3 weeks later. At a Sunday dinner, I drove home specifically to deliver the news in person. I walked into the house carrying a bottle of wine, sat down at the table, and told them that I had been offered the position at Arrowwood Creative a second time and I had accepted. I told them I would be moving to the city in 6 weeks. I gave them the information they needed and answered the questions that were practical. I was warm. I was direct. I did not perform excitement for their benefit, but I did not withhold the news either. Diane's response was interesting. She was clearly conflicted between genuine maternal pride and the discomfort of someone who understood that the thing they had taken had been part of what made this moment harder to reach. She hugged me. She said she was proud. She said it was wonderful news. And then she asked, almost immediately, whether I would be home often and whether I had thought about holidays and whether I would still be able to help with some of the family events she was already planning for the following year. I told her I would do my best to be home for the important occasions. I did not commit to anything beyond that. Gerald shook my hand, which is his version of warmth, and said he was glad it had worked out. Renee, who was at dinner with Colin, gave me a real hug and told me she was so happy for me, and I believe she was. Colin said congratulations and that the city was a great place to build a career. It was a functional, mildly awkward family dinner, and when it was over, I drove back to my apartment and started packing boxes. The move happened 6 weeks later. I rented a truck, hired 2 people to help me load it, and drove 3 hours north without a single dramatic goodbye. I was not running from anything. I was simply going toward the thing I had spent years building toward, through a path that had been made longer and harder than it needed to be, but which I had navigated anyway. The first 3 months in the city were full and demanding. The job was everything I had hoped and harder than I had imagined, which is the combination that actually produces growth. Patricia became a mentor figure without either of us officially naming her that. The work was good. I was good at it. I started to see the shape of the career I had been building toward, and it was real, not theoretical, real. During those 3 months, contact with my family was cordial but different. My mother called every Sunday as she always had, but the calls were shorter and the content had shifted. She spent less time on family logistics and more time on small talk, which told me she was being careful. Gerald texted occasionally with updates about sports teams and home repairs, his standard communication. Renee texted more than she had before, short messages checking in, a photo or two from her new home, small pieces of the ordinary life she was building with Colin. I responded to everything. I remained present. I was just no longer present in the way I had been, the way that had made me available for every financial urgency and every emotional pressure. The repayment conversation resurfaced about 4 months after my move. Renee called on a Saturday morning and asked if we could really talk about the wedding money. I told her yes, and I meant it. She said she and Colin had been going over their finances and they wanted to start paying me back properly. Not the $200 a month plan, something more meaningful. She said they had been able to set aside $1,500 and she wanted to send it to me as a first payment, and they planned to continue sending money monthly until the debt was clear. I thanked her. I told her I was genuinely moved by that. I told her I did not expect it to happen quickly, and I appreciated that she was taking it seriously. I gave her my new bank details. 3 days later, $1,500 appeared in my account. I sat with that deposit for a long time. It was not the full amount. It would take a long time to get to the full amount. But it was something that had been chosen freely without being demanded, and that meant something different from the original giving. My mother did not call to discuss the money directly for another 2 weeks. When she finally brought it up, she said Renee had spoken to her and she wanted to add her own contribution to the repayment. She told me she and Gerald had moved some things around and they were going to send $500 to start and then continue monthly. I thanked her for that as well. What I noticed in that call was the quality of her voice. She was not comfortable. She was doing the right thing, but it cost her something to do it, because doing it acknowledged the original wrong, and acknowledging the wrong meant acknowledging the pattern, and acknowledging the pattern meant acknowledging who she had been in that story. I did not make that easy or hard for her, I just received the acknowledgement. 6 months after my move, something else happened that I had not planned for, and that rearranged several things at once. A colleague at Arrowwood Creative, a man named Desmond who worked in the business development side of the firm, asked me to collaborate on a pitch for a new client. The client was a mid-sized lifestyle brand looking to expand their digital content strategy. Desmond had relationships with the client's leadership team and I had the content expertise. The pitch took 3 weeks to develop and we presented it together to the client's board. We got the account. It was the largest account Arrowwood Creative had landed in 2 years, and Patricia credited both Desmond and me specifically in the company-wide email. 2 months after that, Desmond and I were asked to co-lead the account. 3 months after that, Patricia pulled me into her office and told me that the firm was creating a new director-level position in content strategy and she wanted to recommend me for it. The salary increase attached to the promotion was significant. The title was significant. I accepted the recommendation and went through the internal review process and was offered the position 5 weeks later. I called my mother that evening to share the news. She cried. She said she was so proud. She said she had always known I was going to go far. I listened to all of it and said thank you and meant it, and also sat quietly with the irony of being celebrated by the same voice that had once told me a job was something I could always find again. I did not say that out loud. I did not need to. The facts had said it for me. The months that followed the promotion brought a different kind of contact from my family. My mother began sending me articles she thought I might find interesting for my work. She asked questions about the city, about the firm, about projects I was working on, real questions, not just courtesy. She called once to ask my opinion on a financial decision she and Gerald were considering, which had never happened before. I answered thoughtfully. I gave her my genuine perspective. I did not hold back my knowledge as punishment. I was just present in a different way than I had been, a way that was about substance rather than availability. Renee continued her monthly payments with consistency. Colin sent a note once saying he was glad I was thriving and that Renee talked about me with real admiration. I believed him. Renee and I had a phone call around that time that was one of the better conversations we had ever had, honest and unhurried, the kind where you discover that your sibling has grown in ways you had not tracked closely enough to notice. She told me she had spent a lot of time thinking about how the wedding had been managed, and she felt genuinely sorry for the role she had not played, the role of someone who should have asked harder questions about where the money was coming from. I told her I appreciated that more than I could easily say. About 8 months after my promotion, Gerald called me on a Wednesday afternoon. That was unusual enough that I answered on the second ring. He told me something had happened. He said my mother had been to the doctor with some concerning symptoms and they were waiting on results. His voice was steady in the way his voice was always steady, but I could hear something underneath it that I recognized as fear. I told him I would come home that weekend. I drove home on Saturday morning. The health situation turned out to be serious but treatable, a condition requiring medication and some lifestyle adjustments and careful monitoring, not a crisis but not nothing either. I sat with my parents in their living room for 2 days. I cooked for them. I helped my mother organize her new medication schedule. I drove her to a follow-up appointment and sat in the waiting room with Gerald and did not check my phone even once. I did all of that because it was the right thing to do and because I loved them. Not because the money had been repaid. Not because they had changed completely or admitted everything with perfect clarity. I did it because the work of building a family relationship is not a ledger, even when the money parts of it have to be treated like one. The love was real. The hurt was also real. Both of those things were true at the same time, and being able to hold both truths at once without letting either one erase the other, that was what had changed in me. After my mother's health scare stabilized, there was a softness in the family that had not been there before. Not false softness, not the performance of closeness. Something quieter. Gerald thanked me for coming without me asking him to acknowledge it. Renee drove up on the second day and we all sat around the kitchen table and talked about nothing important for an hour, and it felt like something important anyway. My mother looked at me across the table at one point and said simply, "I see you, Ackles. I see what you do." I did not respond with anything. I just held her gaze and nodded once. Sometimes that is what you have waited for, without knowing you were waiting for it. The repayments continued, not on the original $200 monthly plan. Renee and Colin had increased theirs to $500 a month. My parents had increased theirs to $300. The total was being rebuilt more slowly than it had been taken, but it was being rebuilt with intention, and intention changes the texture of money. About 14 months after I moved to the city, I was invited to present at a regional communications conference. Arrowwood Creative was sponsoring a session on digital content strategy, and Patricia nominated me to represent the firm. I prepared for 3 weeks. I wrote a presentation I was genuinely proud of. I stood in front of a room of 300 professionals and spoke for 40 minutes about the work I had been doing and the thinking behind it. When I finished, there was a long applause and afterward a line of people wanting to exchange cards and continue the conversation. I called my family that evening from the hotel. Renee picked up first and immediately put me on speaker so everyone could hear. I told them about the conference and the presentation and the response. My mother made a sound I had not heard her make in a long time, a full and unguarded sound of pride, the kind that does not leave room for any other emotion. Gerald said with genuine warmth that was his daughter up there. Renee said she wanted to see the presentation and she meant it. I stayed on the phone with them for almost an hour. By the end, we were talking about nothing in particular, just the easy drift of a family that had, through difficulty and honesty and time, found its way back to something resembling itself, not the family it had pretended to be, but something more honest than that and therefore more durable. I want to be clear about what the quiet revenge in this story actually was, because it was not a dramatic scene, it was not an exposé, it was not a confrontation in front of witnesses. The revenge, if that is even the right word for it, was this: I refused to disappear. After the money was gone and the job was lost and the account showed $14, the expected path for a person in my position would have been to quietly absorb the loss, rebuild in silence, maybe mention it once and then let it go the way families let uncomfortable things go because naming them clearly creates too much friction. I did not do that. I named it. I documented it. I had the conversation with my voice level and my facts accurate and my position clear. I set a repayment expectation without screaming. I rebuilt my savings through a path I designed myself. I called the company back and got the second chance. I accepted the job and moved and built the career and got the promotion and stood at the conference and was seen by 300 people in the industry I had chosen. And the people who had once told me I was young and would recover had to watch me recover and then exceed what I had been reaching for to begin with. They had to participate in that story because I invited them to, not as punishment, as truth, because the truth was the most powerful thing I had available to me and I had learned to use it cleanly. There is something I have thought about many times since then. The family dynamic that produced the wedding situation did not come from nowhere. It had been building for years. It was built on the assumption that I could handle things and therefore I would, that my ability to manage was an asset available for community use, that my sacrifices were less noticeable because I made them quietly. The wedding just brought all of it to a single VC. Point like sunlight through a lens. What changed it was not me becoming harder or colder or more guarded. What changed it was me becoming more accurate, more precise in what I said, less willing to manage other people's discomfort by absorbing it silently. The moment I started describing things as they actually were, without apology but also without cruelty, the entire system had to adjust. It could not operate the same way when I refused to be the silent part of its machinery. That is the lesson I carry forward. Not that family is bad, not that love is not real, but that love without honesty becomes something else over time, something closer to use. And use, even when it comes wrapped in warmth, is not love. Real love can survive the truth being spoken clearly. The relationships that could not survive it were not as solid as they appeared. Today, I live in an apartment in the city that I chose and furnished slowly with things I bought myself. My savings account is being rebuilt with the methodical determination of someone who knows exactly how it feels to watch it disappear. I have a job I am good at and a career that is moving in the direction I spent years pointing it. I have a family that is imperfect and complicated and still mine, but mine now on terms that include my voice and my reality and the full accounting of who I am and what it costs to be me. I still go home for the important occasions. I still sit at the kitchen table and talk about nothing important. I still answer the phone on Sundays. The difference is that I do all of that as myself, not as the responsible one, not as the one who will figure it out. Just as Ackles, who figured out a long time ago that the only person responsible for protecting her future was her, and who eventually stopped apologizing for acting accordingly. The morning after my sister's wedding, I sat in a gas station parking lot with $14.32 and made a decision. The decision was not to be angry. The decision was to be clear. And clarity, it turns out, is the most powerful thing a quiet person can become. If you made it to the end of Ackles' story, I want to ask you something, and I really want to hear your answer in the comments. Have you ever been the person in your family who everyone counted on, the one who gave without being asked to stop, the one whose sacrifice was accepted so easily it was never even called a sacrifice? And if so, what was the moment you finally decided to be honest about what it had cost you? Drop your answer below. Ackles' story is about one woman learning to tell the truth out loud. I think a lot of people have a version of that story inside them. Let this be the place where you say it.